Good morning, YouTube. It's 10 a.m. in the great state of Texas. And this is what the great state of Texas looks like during a snowstorm in front of my house. Back in February, I believe this happened. And thought, hey, what a cool way to start this video. Because interesting fact, the weather is going to have a big part of this video. So interesting stuff to start off. So I started this project initially for a New Year's Eve project. So I had some extra epoxy laying around. It was cold here in Texas, and if anybody knows anything about epoxy, it's you don't want to work with epoxy when the epoxy is not set up to room temperature, and if it's cold, it doesn't work as well, and you're going to have problems. And I thought, hey, a cool project would just be a cool little epoxy bowl, mix it all up together, take all these glitters, and just make a cool confetti type of project. And this part of the video was actually filmed December 31st or around December 31st. And then I decided, hey, let's spruce it up and make it even cooler. Take some shavings, put it in a bowl, and then pour the epoxy all over it. And I was like, this is going to be like a cool mixture of stuff with some wood shavings and some epoxy and some glitter. And I thought it was going to turn out, relatively well, just like most of the projects that I do. But this is going to take 3 months to do, so I apologize in advance. This is one of the longer videos that I've ever done on the channel, but there's a reason. It's because this project had so many problems. So I put it in the pressure pot 4.5 hours. Obviously, you guys did not see this on New Year's Eve, and once the epoxy started to settle into those wood chips, 4.5 hours later after being in the pressure pot, I didn't completely cover it. So now what I'm doing is mixing up more epoxy in the cold and going to add some glitter and add some color, put a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little salt and pepper, and try to fill up the rest of the epoxy and then do a lid portion of it as well, because that's what I started to do in 2024. It was just make lids to a lot of my projects. So that's what we've kind of been working on. And here is the pour, and this part relatively easy. The only thing so far that's given me any kind of real issue is, hey, I didn't get to release this on New Year's Eve, and I was like, okay, cool, we can come back and use it and do something a little bit later with it. And then once I poured that, then I just got another bowl, and this is going to be the lid of the project here. And I'm thinking, okay, pretty good. Not a lot of problems here. Just going to take as much of that epoxy out of that bucket as possible. 4.5 hours later, pop it out of the mold, and this is what we got. Cool looking molds. You got the blue, you got the green, you got the turquoise, you got the glitter in there, and it looks really cool. And the wood shavings add a little element to it as well. And I'm thinking, what, okay, cool, this is gonna work out just fine. So a couple of weeks later, ended up getting it on to the workbench, and now we're gonna do what we typically do, which is try to put a piece of pine board onto the epoxy and then get everything secure, put a faceplate on it, and spin it down. Now this, I would say, is the start of the actual problems that we're going to start experiencing here in just a moment. So put the hot glue down, put the face, the little waste block on there, drilled some guide holes, and I'm thinking, okay, this is going to go easy. I've done this hundreds of times. It's not going to be a problem. And I put these in, and then noticed, they're not going in as deep as I would like, and then I tried to force them in there, and then the piece of wood just ends up popping off. So there's a giant crack there in the middle that you can see, and that didn't go the way that I wanted. So then I ended up, having to take all these screws out of it, and then I had to get the waste block off of it. I had to take off all the glue, and then I decided, let's just put the faceplate directly into the epoxy. So come back, scrape all that glue off, and then try to put the actual faceplate just directly to the epoxy. And I've done this before, and I know that it works because I see a lot of other, woodworkers do the exact same thing, and I'm thinking, it's going to work. It's not going to be a problem. So boom, and then it cracked. So then what did I have to do? I had to come back and fix the giant crack that was in there. So here I am with my heat gun trying to warm up the epoxy, because I don't need a lot of epoxy, I just need a little bit of it. And that's what I'm doing with the heat gun there. So if you're wondering why these are upside down and there's a heat gun pointing toward them, I'm just trying to warm up the epoxy so that it'll mix well, so I can fix that gap, and then all I do is come back with some glitter and some dye and try to replicate what it looked like initially when I created it. And then that's what we're doing here. And again, the cold temperatures and just things not going right obviously are causing me to have lots of problems. So instead of using the hot glue again, instead of just doing and repeating, I got these big blocks of 2x4 that I had laying around. I cut them down into squares. You can see I'm just filling up the bowl here where I had that epoxy just pop off, and now I'm just putting it on the sides, putting it on the top, and then I'm going to use this as an attachment point, and after 4.5 hours it's going to adhere completely to this. And I'm just going to start doing this in the future because I've had so many problems with these cheap pine boards. And here I am just pouring out the rest of the epoxy onto the, doing something fun with it, just throwing it on the silicone mat there. We'll come back and peel that off a little bit later. But that's essentially what I'm doing here. So I learned from my mistake, and then here we go. 4.5 hours later, 3 months later from the beginning of the project, this is what it looks like. And you can see there's a giant gap where the epoxy did not fill in, or it settled, and now I'm thinking, okay, you know what? We just got to go for it at this point. So actually, this part I did this week. So literally from the point when you saw the beginning of the video when it was snowing was like February. From the start of it was like December. And now we're doing this project the week of like March 21 or something like that. So getting the faceplate on, I drilled some guide holes, and I'm thinking this thing is too big to crack with these small little screws. And surprisingly, it worked. I'm just going to do this in the future. That's how I'm going to just do this. So got that all fixed up, got it onto the lathe, and now we can actually start doing some actual woodworking projects. So got that on there, and I haven't worked with epoxy in a really long time. It's about 65 degrees here in Texas, in West Texas, in the Panhandle right now. So the epoxy, overall, once I got to this point, not a whole lot of issues, because getting to this point was the issue with the crack in the wood, the crack in the epoxy, and just not being able to put the faceplate on. I'm surprised that I got to this point, because honestly, if this didn't work, I didn't know what I was going to do. So between all the times we had to fill in the epoxy and add stuff and take stuff away, on the chisels I could just feel the different layers of epoxy. It feels different. You can see a giant bubble gap right there as well. So just really having to come down, shave that down as best we can, and just try to salvage a bowl out of it. And I'm really worried that I'm going to have chip out because that seems to be the theme of a majority of my epoxy projects lately. Because once I have one problem, it seems like it's just a cascade of issues, and you just have to work through them, work the problem. I think if there's any piece of advice I could really give any woodworker out there, and I'm not really good at woodworking, it's just work the problem, get through it, do the absolute best you can, and just try to work through all the issues that you have. So once I get everything into a nice cylinder shape, then we just came back, removed the tailstock, and now we're just trying to make a nice smooth lip of the bowl, and then we're going to come back and make a mortise here in just a second. And I didn't want to go too deep. I just wanted to have enough material to work with, just using my small carbide tool here. Actually, it's technically a medium-sized carbide on this one, and then just getting to a nice depth. And here's where I realized I might have made a mistake. I was using my large square carbide tool, and I was like, no, don't use that. Come back with my miniature one. That probably saved this project more than anything else, because every time I use my large square carbide on a epoxy project, I get so much chip out and chatter. So just using that smaller miniature one definitely made the difference in this project. And here we are. Mortise is going pretty smooth, not a whole lot of issues here. Sizing it up, and then we got to a good size and a good depth. And then we're just doing some finish up, touch up work. And then we can flip it, and then we can start the actual difficult part, which is the gouging. So this part held up really well. Here we are, just taking the faceplate off. And it sucks that I have to use these giant pieces of pine board that are they're ginormous. But instead of, chopping that off, all I did was go ahead and just eat through it with the carbide tool. I thought that would just be a better kind of scenario instead of just hand sawing it or trying to pop it off. I'm just going to go ahead and just eat through that And then that seems to be the best play, is just taking your time and just really working that material down. And it's easy, it's just pine, so it's not a whole lot of issue here. And then we're just taking the parting tool once I get everything into a nice cylindrical shape, and then we're just going to pop that off, and then boom, there we go. And then we'll just finish up what's left there. And then I'm thinking, okay, pretty good so far, not a whole lot of issues. And I'm thinking, okay, this might actually work. So once we got that down, now we can actually clean it up, and now we can start the gouging part. But if you saw there just a while ago, you could see that giant gap where the epoxy did not fill in. So what I'm having to do here is stop and start the lathe, trying to save us as much material as possible, and trying to avoid chip out, because that was one of my biggest concerns doing this portion of it here. Was I'm like, things are going too smooth, not for something to go catastrophically wrong. But we just took our time, ate through it, not a whole lot of issues here. So now we're just starting the actual gouging part. And once we did this part, I was pretty happy with where we were as far as the project. I didn't have any chip out that I could remember. I just really took my time. I used the medium carbide tool the whole way. I don't think I did a lot with the larger carbide tool, and because I was just concerned I was going to get chip out and I was going to have a lot of issues. But this part seemed to go relatively easy and just getting to a nice depth. We haven't worked with epoxy in a really long time. If you've seen my videos for the past couple of months, they've been mostly just wood block projects. And working with wood is a lot different than working with epoxy. It's kind of like riding a bike, though. You never really forget how to do it. But every piece of epoxy is always different. It always feels different on the chisels. You have a general idea of how it goes a lot of the time. But if you haven't done it in a long time, you kind of just have to get eased back into it a little bit and not be as aggressive. But now that it's warming up in Texas, it's going to be a little bit easier to work with a carbide tool. The beautiful snow in the beginning of the video, obviously, that was back in February, but now it's like 60-ish, 70 degrees here in Texas, or at least in my little area. So that's going to help with the epoxy as well. And I think that's why I had so much problems with the epoxy and getting it initially worked up, was just that coldness. Once it like shocks the epoxy, it's just brittle and hard to work with. And here we are now that we finished out the gouging portion for the bowl. We can start making the lid portion of it here. And essentially the same thing. I didn't show you guys where I ended up drilling the faceplate on there. It went on pretty smooth, and all we're doing here is just getting an idea for what the shape of the lid's going to be. And most of the lids that I have done so far have just been pretty universal. We're just getting everything in a nice cylindrical shape. And then we're going to go ahead and make a mortise on it, and then flip it and take off the waste block, and then size up our bowl. But this part didn't take very long. My biggest fear was just, I've learned from my making of my bowl lids not to go too deep when I do this portion on the mortise, just barely working through. And again, using the miniature square carbide tool was the best thing that I could have done. Instead of like being aggressive with the larger carbide tool, the smaller one works wonders. So here we are, sized everything up. Now we're just getting an idea for how much material we're going to take off. So essentially the same thing here. I really need to work on my camera skills. Sorry about this, but wasting the waste block, just eating through it with the carbide tool, and then we're going to take the parting tool and then just pop this thing off. Not a whole lot of issues here. Boop, falls right off. And now we'll just clean this up. And then once we get this into a nice good shape and nice and flat, then we can start to size up the actual lid of the bowl. And here I am just sizing it a little bit, trying to get an idea of where I want it to be, how much material needs to come off. And initially I was going to use, again, the larger carbide tool, but the small carbide is probably the best thing that I've ever done as far as this project. And the shavings are getting everywhere. Here I am starting and stopping the lathe a couple of times, trying to get a nice size fit for the lid. And just spoiler alert, it doesn't. I end up taking off too much material. But I was pretty happy that we just were able to size it up pretty good. So a lot of wobble. I'm like, screw it. It's fine. Just getting to this point, I'm happy with it where we're at. But here we are. Now we're just taking the material down, and we're going to make a mortise. Once we get this part done, we're going to flip it one more time onto the chuck, and then we actually make the dome of the lid where we want to. Trying not to take off as much material as I can. Just save as much, but just take enough down to where we can flip it and then start to take everything down. And once we did that, now we're just making the dome shape of where we want everything to be. And so far so good. Most of the project from here, goes relatively well. Once we got the actual epoxy onto the lathe, the rest of the project went pretty smooth. It was just that beginning part where I had so many issues that this is probably one of my most aggravating projects. But I don't give up on a lot of projects. You saw my bonus clips or bonus videos this week, and we just show all the problems, show all the failure, and here we are just trying to size down the lip of the bowl and how much material we need. And I spun it a little bit and realized that was a bad idea, and then just came back and then just ended up eyeballing how much material that we needed to take down. So really happy that this project is finally over. Again, I did this project starting back in like December 30th of 2023 and then barely getting it out to you guys on the 24th of March 2024. So this has been a project in the making for the past 3 months. And then we're just sanding, going from 320 all the way up to 800, doing that with both the bowl and the lid. And then we're going to come back, finish it up with a little bit of wet sanding, going through all the micro mesh. We haven't done that in a long, long time, but I love sanding. It's my absolute favorite. I hate sanding. It's the worst. But here we are just cleaning everything up. And then once we got it sanded and polished, it starts to look a lot better. So this is probably one of my favorite bowls that I've ever done. It's absolutely beautiful. And then we'll just come back, hit it with the wood wax. I didn't put any Yorkshire grit, or I didn't put any Shello wax on it. I just came back, hit it with regular wood wax, and it looks beautiful. So this part went relatively easy. Not a whole lot of problems. And then we're also going to shine up the lid as well. And this looks gorgeous. I love how this looks. The camera really doesn't do it justice, just how gorgeous this does look. But you can see here the shine comes all the way through. And this is probably, in spite of all my aggravation, one of my most favorite projects that I've done. And then we're going to just finish it up with my signature thing here. Just drilling a hole, 15-minute epoxy, and then using a light bright peg to finish it off. And then boop, we are done. Just getting that on there. 15-minute epoxy. Sets up in 15 minutes. Takes 24 hours to cure. Just in case you didn't know that. I just found that out. And then here it is, all done, all nice and neat. Looks gorgeous. Love it. Glad we got through with this project, because man, was it a pain in the ass to finish up. But overall, really happy how this turned out. Beautiful project. I'm glad we didn't quit. Glad we kept on going. So hope you guys liked the project. A little bit longer video, but we had a lot of problems and I wanted to show all of that. So hope you guys liked it. Hope you got something out of it. I know I had a lot of fun on it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Alright, hope everybody's doing well out there. Peace. Alright, so project is done. And after all the fuck-ups, after all the waiting, this guy is finally finished. And it looks gorgeous. I love how this looks. The wood, the epoxy, the glitter, all that good stuff. It's just something that looks really cool, and the inside of it absolutely looks beautiful too. Camera really doesn't do it justice, but man, that looks awesome though. But all the problems that came into this project, literally just more than I wanted to deal with. But I always show failure, I always show my mess ups, and we got something out of it. So anyway, we're gonna start doing a lot more epoxy projects now that it's warmed up here in Texas a little bit. But you saw from the intro of the video, it does snow here. And for Texans, that's a lot of snow. But anyway, hope you guys liked it. Hope you got something out of it. I know this is a bit of a long one, but the journey was long. But anyway, I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, peace.